You're listening to Your Words Unleashed podcast with host Dr. Leslie Wong, helping women scholars master their writing habits and publish a book that matters. Hey there, writers. Today, I felt inspired to publish an episode about utilizing plain language in your scholarly writing. So lately, I've been listening to a range of podcasts and reading books that discuss more holistic ways of approaching work and life. And one idea that keeps popping up is that in modern capitalistic society, we are always striving to be extraordinary. And this means that being ordinary or commonplace in any way is seen as a flaw, as something to be staunchly avoided. Which is rather ridiculous when the vast majority of what we do in our lives, for the most part, involves ordinary stuff. You still have to brush your teeth every day and respond to emails and pay your taxes and buy groceries, etc., etc. Does that regularity take away from our lives? I think we just accept it for the most part. But it's gotten me thinking about how this striving for extraordinariness extends into academia and the realm of scholarly writing in particular. And here, I'm not just talking about output and maintaining a high level of externally measurable productivity, although of course that matters a lot. This need to be different also shows up in how people push themselves and are pushed by their fields to use certain types of language that distinguish you from the crowd. It starts in grad school. Students try to emulate the styles of the books and articles they read. Often consciously, they try really hard to adopt a more formal tone that makes their work legible to other experts, while also moving it further and further away from what quote-unquote regular people, as in the general public, can understand, relate to, and apply to their own lives. There's pressure to use fanciful jargon that signals to others in your field that you too are a serious scholar. And I've joked before about my dislike of the word interpolate. I still hate that word. But there's actually tons more terms on that list. Another one is interlocutors. Am I saying that right? I mean, I know there are very specific reasons people use that term, and I'm showing my ignorance and not knowing what those are. But I just don't get why we don't say people I talked to or people I interviewed. But let me get back to what I was saying before. So to get established in their fields and add new lines to their CVs, most people publish journal articles first. And due to the vastly limited audience, these papers necessarily utilize a lot of specialized language and a more objective tone in which the author as a human being, as a real person, usually completely disappears. And this writing style gets rewarded in the form of publications. Then, a few years later, a lot of folks try to use this style when writing their books, and it just doesn't work. People often start to question the overall purpose of their research or its relevance to the world at large. So often, I hear academics complain about the ivory tower and ideas and information not being made accessible to the general public. But too often, scholars don't see how the language they're using is itself exclusionary to most other people on this planet. The choice of words either invites people in or keeps them out. And the problem with keeping people out is that the potential impact of your ideas becomes very limited. So in this episode, I want to propose something that's potentially kind of revolutionary. And that is, to subvert power dynamics in the academy, we need to say what we actually mean in extraordinarily clear and simple language. In short, there's power in plainness. You can find the transcript of this episode at yourwordsunleashed.com/67. So let me talk first about what inspired this episode. A little while ago, I received an update from one of my earliest book coaching clients, someone I will refer to as May. She's a non-native English-speaking junior faculty member at a top research institution. So because books take such a long time to write and to go through the review and publication process, I often lose track of what's happening with my clients' books. But I love to stay in touch, and I was thrilled when May shared the full review she received about her manuscript after having been reviewed by a top press. But before I get to that, I will say that this client was amazingly focused and productive during our 8 months of work together. She wrote 2 new book chapters and planned another couple of journal articles from her dissertation data. She created an interesting and useful theoretical framework that goes far beyond her specific case. And I also helped her figure out a distinct book writing voice, which she wanted to make engaging and accessible. By the time we finished our work, she was about to submit a proposal and several chapters to her top book press. And at the end of our sessions, May gave me the following feedback. Coaching has been a great experience and very helpful in pushing me to think clearly about my ideas and tell my stories in a way that makes sense to my readers. I'm confident that my book will be making great contributions to my fields. And she wrote that feedback long before she finished the full manuscript. But that confidence and clarity was one of the main things that reviewers picked up on. They were convinced that the book's theoretical contribution would make it an award contender, which was so exciting for me to hear. But one person also complimented the book's storytelling style. They wrote something that I've never seen before, which was, quote, "Although the author is a non-native English speaker, she nonetheless writes in an unusually clear way, clearer than many of her academic colleagues for whom English is a first language. She avoids trendy buzzwords and jargon, and simply says what she means in a straightforward fashion. This makes for very compelling reading. This is the academic equivalent of a page-turner." Unquote. Wow, right? So this reviewer was so impressed by the fact that May was using plain language to express sophisticated ideas. Oftentimes, we think of things like theory and general understandability as being fundamental opposites, when really they can go hand in hand. But it takes having really great ideas plus dedication to simplicity, which is hard for a few different reasons. So I am so proud of May because she's an immigrant woman of color who could even more easily have chosen to write a highbrow monograph that would be legible only to experts in her field. I believe it's much harder for folks from marginalized backgrounds to allow themselves to use plain language for fear of not being taken seriously. And this includes, but is not limited to, people of color, first-generation college students, women, differently abled folks, non-binary people, and non-native English speakers. This conditioning starts early. I actually first noticed this in myself as an undergrad. I would never ask a question unless I thought it was incredibly insightful or thought-provoking or something that I felt like others in the class would benefit from. It was a lot of mental gymnastics and self-judgment just to get to a place where I felt comfortable raising my hand. And the result was that I never received answers to most of my questions because I shut myself down. And this tendency to want to prove myself as being extraordinarily insightful or intelligent stayed with me and got much more pervasive in grad school. I suffered from immense imposter syndrome and marveled at classmates who could seemingly just come up with genius-level thoughts on the cuff. I would jot questions down in my notebook and edit them for half an hour before asking, internally hoping that somebody else would ask first so I didn't have to. And this extended into my writing habits as well. I tried to write in academic ease, which is not natural to literally anyone. And it caused my brain to hurt and intensified the feeling of being an imposter. Luckily, I had mentors who were ethnographers, and they encouraged me to write my dissertation in a storytelling style. That didn't make the process of writing any easier for me, but it did give me permission to paint pictures with words and to evoke the senses and emotions of my readers. And when I did that, I necessarily wrote the theoretical sections of my dissertation, and later, my first book, more simply and more accessibly. Okay, so let's say you want to write more inclusively, but you're not sure how. I'm going to give a few points to help you get there. First, you need to start by asking, who's my audience? Once in a while, you're only going to be writing for a handful of specialists in your field. So therefore, it makes sense to use all the jargon and technical terms. But what about everyone else? Rarely do my clients say that they only want to reach other experts, which is like 10 people, right? They want to write for their students, for policymakers, journalists, the general public. A lot of folks want their book to be understood and appreciated by their moms or grandparents who may not have had the same access to education. So depending on how you write it, Anyone could benefit from your research. But if you use only insider language, you will probably alienate most people. So here's a thought exercise. Imagine that a smart, curious, non-academic friend who knows very little about your work asks about your research at a dinner party. How would you explain it to them? In my view, that's the vibe you want to be going for when you write. You're not dumbing anything down. You're actually opening it up for more people to think about and use. So I personally have always believed in making academic research available to the general public. I mean, why do years and years of intensive research and writing only for it to be kept behind prohibitively expensive paywalls? I was an early adopter of academia.edu and put all of my published work out there for public consumption. And no lawyers have come after me yet. Since leaving the academy, I forgot about my profile. So I decided to check it again, and I noticed something really interesting. My most professionally well-regarded article appeared in a top journal in my field over a decade ago. And it has only ever been downloaded 134 times. And this was a publication that someone called a career maker, mind you. That article was so difficult to write and get published because I was required to create an innovative theoretical framework. I managed to do it, but it felt very forced. Partly because I thought the biggest contribution of my work was in the stories I was telling. Meanwhile, a small study I co-authored with a friend that we published in a small, specialized subfield journal, only a couple of years before the other one, has been downloaded nearly 14,000 times. That article was written in the plainest language possible. And the difference between them was intent. I wrote the first article to impress my colleagues and solidify my own professional trajectory, while the latter was always meant to help other people, specifically adoptees and adoptive families. And although it was published in 2010, I still receive very gratifying messages of thanks from readers. And these readers are not academic. So I'm relieved to be out of a system that ranks scholarly contributions by impact factor. Just think about how much more academics could contribute to the well-being of individuals in society if public engagement was rewarded. So my second point about this is about a concept I recently learned called the curse of knowledge, which seems to be used more often in the business world. But basically, it's the idea that once you know something, it's hard to imagine not knowing it. And then you too easily assume that other people know it too. So there's a Harvard Business Review article that cites this one psychology study that really illustrates the curse of knowledge. So in it, one person was assigned to pick a well-known song like Happy Birthday and tap out the rhythm on a table. Then there was another person whose job was to listen and guess what the song was. So beforehand, the tappers were asked to predict the probability that the listener would guess the right song. And they estimated a 50% chance. And in the actual experiment, out of 120 songs, listeners were only able to identify 3 correctly, a success rate of only 2.5%. Obviously, the tapper just assumed that what was in their mind would also be in other people's minds. Let me give you another example. For some reason that I can't figure out, I'm still on the mailing list for the American Journal of Sociology, which is one of the flagship journals of the discipline. High impact factor, incredibly low acceptance rate, razor sharp reviews, you know the deal. So I got an email about just accepted publications, and one of the titles stood out to me. It was, quote, Gradationalism Revisited, Intergenerational Occupational Mobility Along Axes of Occupational Characteristics. Excuse me? My brain literally got tripped up on every word of that title because it feels like I have heard all of these words before, but put together in this way, I have no idea what they mean. What is gradationalism, and why does it need to be revisited? What's occupational mobility and occupational characteristics? What's the difference between them? On a broader level, it has me thinking, who is this paper written for? Who is it meant to help? So this is not to say that all of this journal's articles have convoluted titles like this by any means. But when they do, at best, it demonstrates the curse of knowledge, and at worst, it's professional gatekeeping. When you're deep in your field, it's easy to forget how foreign these terms sound to other people. And that's the sneakiness of jargon. You might not even realize you're doing it because to you, these words are like second nature. But to others, they're like a secret code they don't have the tools to crack. And the goal is to break this curse. You want to help people understand better, not confuse them. So plain language cuts through the noise and invites readers into your world rather than keeps them on the outside. And again, I think you have much more opportunity to do this when writing a book than an article. So my third point is that I think simplicity is actually harder to achieve because there's nothing to hide behind. There's this myth in academia that if your writing is too simple, people won't respect you or your work, when simplicity is really a strength. When you write clearly, you show that you really understand the topic. If you can explain a complex idea plainly and without embellishment, it means you've truly mastered it. And that's why teaching always helped me understand difficult concepts better. When I was a grad student, I was a TA for a year-long social theory class at UC Berkeley, taught by the brilliant Michael Buravoy. And what I will always remember and appreciate about him is that he was able to take Marx, Weber, and Durkheim's theories about the division of labor in society and break them down into digestible, understandable pieces. Not only that, but he made these older ideas deeply relevant to the world today. And he did it by using plain language, storytelling, and stick figure diagrams that he would draw on the chalkboard that presented theoretical ideas visually. Now, if you can do this sort of thing in the classroom, you can do it in your writing as well. So breathe life into your topic. Make it three-dimensional. Allow yourself to be seen. Make people feel something, not just think something. Another thing about simplicity is that it is often far more accurate. I read a lot of writing that can only be called overstuffed. And by that, I mean there are entire paragraph-long sentences that are stuffed with way too much info. They often include many lists of numerous things in a row, each of which should probably be explained in its own sentence. There are often caveats in parentheses that show the author's fear of reviewer number 2. There's a lot of not only, but also clauses, which I believe should be used sparingly. And at the end of it, I'm not entirely sure which specific point I'm supposed to be taking away. I also have no idea what the author thinks either. So if someone has to reread your sentence 5 times to figure out what you're saying, ask yourself, is it helping them? Remember, the goal of writing is communication. It's relationship building. If people aren't getting what you're saying, then you're missing an opportunity for connection. So let's sum everything up. I've tried to persuade you to use more plain language in your writing. I made 3 points about this. First, define your audience, or else you will default to writing for your critics. And these critics are experts in your field. However, when you make your work accessible and legible to non-experts, it widens the potential impact of your ideas. Second, if we don't check ourselves, it's easy to fall prey to the curse of knowledge. Remember that very few people in the world know or care much about the topics that academics study. You need to be the one to translate it to them and convince them to care. So when you're writing, think about how you might teach your work to a class and make it relevant to their lives. And third, simplicity is powerful because there's nothing to hide behind. The ability to express complex ideas in plain language shows incredible mastery of your subject matter. Obviously, I'm not saying that every single one of your publications needs to be written in ordinary language. There's a time and place for it, and I get that there are different audiences and different aims. But pretty much all scholars I know want their work to make a difference in the world and not just in their fields. And that means unlearning and decolonizing our minds around this issue. We need to stop looking down our noses on writing that uses words most people can understand. So if you want to prioritize connection and communication over signaling and striving, this is the truly extraordinary way to go. reach out to me if you need any help doing it. Good luck. Thanks for tuning in to Your Words Unleashed podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with other writers or leave a rating and review. To find the full transcript and catch all the latest from me, check out my website, yourwordsunleashed.com. I'll talk to you next time. Happy writing!